Fans of the Horus Heresy, thank you very much for joining me for a tactics review. And today we are talking about Dreadnoughts versus Castellax, a damage resilience analysis. So, I hear you ask the question, why are we interested in examining the damage resilience of Dreadnoughts and Castellax? Well, it's a point that I've debated with people I play the Horus Heresy with, from the perspective of both a Legion and a Mechanicum player, and that discussion has sometimes been somewhat verbose, and it's an interesting comparison because these two, Dreadnoughts, Walkers, Castellax, Battle Automata, work very differently in the game. The former is a vehicle, the latter is a monstrous creature. And by doing this, I wanted to just sort of quantify how vulnerable or not vulnerable these different units are, and to highlight the relative pros and cons of their defensive capabilities. So, to help us with this, I've done a little bit of number crunching in the form of a little table. So let us just zoom in a touch. There we go. Right. So what have I done? So we've got, I've compared the hitting power of a variety of different strength weapons versus standard Space Marine Dreadnought, so the Castroferrum, or the good old Boxnaught, the Contemptor Dreadnought, and then also the Castellax Battle Automata as well. So the Castroferrum and the Contemptor, as I say, are both vehicles, so they have armour values, and they are susceptible to the effects of vehicle special damage results. The Castellax, on the other hand, is a monstrous creature, so has a toughness characteristic and a wound score. So what have I done? So I've taken a set of weapons of ascending lethality. So we've got a bolt gun, a heavy bolter, a Volkite culverin, an autocannon, a crack missile, and a las cannon and a neutron laser. So we have weapons of strength 4 through to 10 and AP 5 through to 1 in the case of a neutron laser. And what I've done is I've worked out a number of outcomes. So firstly, in this section, we have the percentage chance of causing a single wound or hull point to the target. So this percentage chance is inclusive of the to hit roll with a Space Marine shooting at ballistic skill 4. No twin linking involved. No bonuses to hit involved at all. So we can see, in the case of an autocannon and Castroferrum, there is a 22% chance of inflicting a hull point. Conversely, a bolt gun versus a Castellax has got a 4% chance of causing a wound. Having worked out those base percentage chances, I've then converted that into a shots to kill, or an average shots to kill, for each of the 3 units. So when I say shots to kill, I mean the number of shots required on average to inflict 3 hull points on either the Castroferrum or the Contemptor, or 4 wounds in the case of a Castellax. So clearly that is average, and bear in mind you can get off average results. So for example, an unlucky Castellax could be killed in as few as 4 bolt gun shots. And then finally, and this applies to, finally I've worked out the chance of an explode result occurring on the vehicle damage chart. So this is a result of a 7 on the table and can only be achieved by AP2 and AP1 weapons. And of course it only applies to the Castroferrum and Contemptor Dreadnoughts as vehicles. The Castellax has no vulnerability in that particular area. So a few assumptions just to cover off. So a hull point loss assumes a glancing or a penetrating hit, or a wound, a successful wound at ballistic skill 4. The number of average shots to kill assumes no explodes results occur. The chance of an explodes result is per shot taken, and it's a subset of a chance of causing a wound in the first place, or causing a hull point loss in the first place. So let me explain that in more detail. If we take the example of a neutron laser shooting at a Contempt Dreadnought, there is a 30% chance of inflicting a hull point. Within that 30%, you have a 7.4% chance of causing an explodes result with that shot. So, in other words, you got 22.6% chance of only causing a hull point loss, and 7.4% chance of knocking it out in one hit. Next assumption here, I've ignored the effect of the deflagrate in the case of a Volkite culverin. That's obviously, that reduces the vulnerability a little bit of a Castellax, but it's more just to understand the strength effect as well. And then the final thing, which applies equally to these, a couple of final things. So around saving throws, in the case of where saving throws are part of the unit's integral armour, then they've been factored in. So in the case of a Contempt Dreadnought, it has an adamantic shield. The Castellax has got a mixture of its natural armour and an adamantic shield. And those saving throws have been factored into the chance of wounding and shots to kill as well. The Castoferum doesn't have any benefit there, so it only has an armour value. 40k is a tactically very complicated game, with all the cover you can have involved in the game. So, here I'm ignoring the effects of cover completely. So we're just assuming shots are taken in the open. I'm also assuming that shots are always hitting the front armour, i.e. the best armour of the Castoferum and Contempt Dreadnoughts, so no flanking shots are occurring. Right, so that's the assumptions out of the way. What did I find with this bit of analysis? So there's a general perception, I think, that there's certainly a perception that Castellax are rather tough and Dreadnoughts are perhaps a little bit on the flimsy side because of their vulnerabilities on the vehicle damage chart, which this shows, but it also elaborates on that, shall we say, as well. So let's just look at the basic chances of taking a wound. So first observation is Castellax have a vulnerability to small arms fire. So both in the case of the bolter and the heavy bolter, the Castellax has got a 4% chance of taking a wound off each shot, whereas both of the Dreadnoughts are proof against that type of fire. So, and in the case of Castellax, we're looking at 108 shots to kill on average. Now, 108 is a lot, but if you think about tactical Space Marines and the fury of the Legion, that doesn't then seem quite so many. And it means that Castellax can by most opponents in most Marine, certainly Legion opponents, Castellax have got a vulnerability to them, and you have always got a chance of damaging them. Obviously, but with your basic infantry, Castoferums and Contemptors have a degree of invulnerability there. So, what do we then see? So, as the weapon strength start to increase, the Dreadnoughts start to become vulnerable to, obviously, hull point loss. And if we go to weapon strength 6 of Volkite culverin, we can see that the Castoferum has an 11% chance of losing a hull point, which is more than the Castellax's 7%. And that has a big effect when you translate that into average shots to kill. So the Castoferum is more vulnerable with fewer hull points. So you're looking at 27 shots to kill the Castoferum, but 54 to take the Castellax down. So at strength 6, a Castoferum it shows that a Castoferum Dreadnought is much more vulnerable than a Castellax. So that's one thing worth bearing in mind. Castoferums you want to keep them away from strength 6 weaponry, and if you think about strength 6 weaponry, it's quite often high volume fire. So we've got the culverin there which has a lot of shots. Also things like multi-lasers as well. Now, if we move the weapon strength up, we can see that the Castoferrum has got a linear increase in vulnerability. So it goes up in increments of about 11%. The Contemptor is similar. I mean, you know, it's got an armor value of 13, so until you get to strength 7, it has no vulnerability. But then it goes up in about 7% increments, topping out at 30% on the Contemptor versus a neutron laser and 56% on the Castoferrum versus a neutron laser. The Castellax, though, is odd, and that's because, compared to those two, and that's because of its toughness characteristic. And what you can see is there is only a slow incremental increase in its vulnerability up to the autocannon at 11% wound chance. Now, there's two things working there. There's the way that strength versus toughness works, and also the fact that the Castellax has got a 3+ standard armor save. But look at the difference in vulnerability when you move from strength 7 at AP4 with the autocannon to strength 8 AP3 with a cracked missile. The vulnerability of the Castellax nearly trebles up to 30%, and the number of shots required almost goes down by nearly a third, from 36 down to 14. So if you're looking for a weapon to take on Castellax, which is very efficient points wise, the missile launcher is one. And if you're wanting weapons that are generally effective at killing it, you're wanting something that's at least AP3 and preferably strength 8 or better. If you use that type of weaponry against Castellax, you're going to kill them much more quickly than with lighter weaponry, because as we can see here, the Castellax are very resilient to that lighter weaponry. But then the Castellax's vulnerability plateaus shortly after that at strength 9 AP2, where it has a 37% chance of taking a wound. But moving to strength 10 AP1 with a neutron laser, the Castellax is no more vulnerable. So I guess that tells us that if you're in a tactical situation where you're trying to decide, what should I put against an enemy neutron laser type weapon, so very high strength, very high AP, well, send your Castellax rather than some other units, because it's a good way of sucking the firepower out of those dedicated anti-tank units. And certainly if you have the choice between a Castellax and the Thanatar, well, throw the Castellax in the way. Also look at how the shots to kill is affected here. So the Contemptor at strength 7 is on 41, then it halves at strength 8 to 21. The Castellax is going 36, then down to 14. Then when we move to the last cannon, you need 14 shots to kill on the Contemptor. However, it's 11 shots to kill on the Castellax. So the relative gap in vulnerability is closing, and then they have equal vulnerability to the neutron laser. And I suppose the other thing to say here is the poor Castoferrum is much more vulnerable than the other two units in this case. And if you compare the vulnerabilities of the Castoferrum and Contemptor Dreadnoughts, clearly it tells us that if your Dreadnought if you're deploying it in any sort of role where it's going to take enemy fire in substantial quantity, the Contemptor is almost certainly always the go-to choice, because it is just so much more resilient than the Castoferrum. Castoferrum Dreadnoughts are quite vulnerable. I mean, clearly Castoferrums do have some very good applications, and you have the Siege Dreadnought class as well, which is something special in itself. But yeah, Castoferrums are best either in roles where you keep them out of the harm's way more, so say Mortis Dreadnoughts role, and in that case, they're more efficient than Contemptors for points, or in the very specialist application roles, or just tactically use them against the units that have only got small arms, because those low strength weapons you'll just dominate those units armed with them. So what else do we draw from this analysis? So yeah, so I guess the explodes is something different as well, and you can see again the much greater vulnerability of the Castroferum versus a Contemptor of being one-shotted, but that's just playing out the ratios here into the explodes results. So interesting to think about that. I mean, what do you really draw from this? I mean, I guess everyone, we all understand the relative capabilities, but I suppose one thing that you might draw from this is, well, if you're a Marine player and you have the option in your army list, well, don't just take Dreadnoughts, or don't just take Dreadnoughts. Try use your force organisation to get some Castellax robots in as well. Why not have the best of both worlds? Why limit yourself to just using Dreadnoughts? And very accessible ways to get a Castellax in your force is use of the Praevian Consul Centurion upgrade. So that's certainly worthy of consideration to do that. I mean, I guess there's a whole host of other considerations that go on the back of this. I mean, Castellaxes are vulnerable to weapons that Castroferums and Contemptors aren't. So, for example, they have a vulnerability to rad weapons, both in close combat, i.e. rad grenades, but more interestingly, and this is a ranged combat analysis mainly, is around rad missiles. So, think of your options for rad missiles. I mean, destroyer squads are too expensive. However, if you're a Space Marine force, there are ways of getting rad missiles into your Tech Marine units. And likewise, if you're a Mechanicum player, you can get them into Engine City units as well. So certainly that's a useful thing to consider. Likewise, Castroferum and Contemptor Dreadnoughts are vulnerable to the effects of haywire. And they're very vulnerable to haywire, as all vehicles are. So, yeah, but that's general vehicle tactics. Always protect your vehicles from haywire armed troops. Yeah, so I hope that's an interesting bit of number crunching and comparative defensive capabilities for these units, and I hope that gets you thinking, and perhaps get some discussion going around when to use Dreadnoughts versus Castellax, and and why not try use both in an army? Why limit yourself to one? Anyway, I hope you very much enjoyed that. I'll speak to you next time, and goodbye.